Hey everybody. Hey, it's John Arnold here of J. Arnold and Associates, back with another edition of our Watch This Space podcast. This is now going to be the June 2020 edition. Glad to have you with us. And joining me as always, my trusty colleague, Chris Fine. Hey Chris.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody.
Hey, yeah, so welcome back, all of us. That sounds a bit redundant if we're all holed up working in our home offices and whatever, but that's just the reality. And I think today we'll kind of keep on that theme a little bit. I know, Chris, you and I have been, adapting like everybody else. I've been involved in a couple of virtual events since our last podcast. And I think this new normal, we're past that term now, right? It's more like, okay, how do we get through this to the other side? But nobody knows what that other side is going to look like. So I know both of us have a couple of thoughts on what that might look like, and hopefully we're getting closer to that than just being stuck going nowhere. How are you seeing things right now?
Well, John, I think you and I talked about the idea of following up on our podcast that was about the future of remote work. And I think we had concluded there that remote work is going to be part of the new normal. But as you say, we were 2 months further into it now, and perhaps we can make some suggestions or thoughts about what the people side, the non purely technical side of where things are going. And on that score, I think that the additional time working remotely has revealed more pluses and minuses of it. I still think there is going to be a long-term change, and it's going to be much more about balanced work, where individuals have much more choice about being less or more remote. But as you and I have been talking about, there may be a snapback, and I think we're seeing a little bit more of that than we were before. And there could be a period of time where, especially if and when we're not quite so constrained by the virus in terms of physical space, let's say there's a vaccine or whatever, the immediate post vulnerability stage, if and when that happens, you have to wonder how much of a compensating reaction there's going to be on the part of businesses and employees uh, about where people work and how space is laid out and what they do.
You know, we're in that early stage of, reopening, as they say, the States and, and Canada here too. We're slowly testing the waters on that. And you certainly, it's not a stretch to hear the concerns about, the second wave kind of thing. And I think that's certainly likely. And let's just say that does happen. And, it just prolongs things and we're right back where we started. And that's very possible. Um, if we get into that scenario, it seems to me that that's just only going to harden the positions of companies to keep this work from home mode going almost indefinitely.
I think there's a chance. I think also companies really do have a dilemma. And again, we always have to reemphasize that we're talking about a certain segment of the workforce, and we're not trying to exclude the very large segment, possibly even larger, that doesn't have the luxury of this. But let's just say
Yeah.
in corporate world and in some other areas where people do have more flexibility about where they work, um, I do feel that companies that have a dilemma about liability, about what risk are they willing to take on and when, and as long as there is so I think it comes into two phases. I think that irrespective of the reopening, which is going to, one would think, proceed apace, even if it has setbacks, as long as there's a problem with the disease and there's not a really comprehensive treatment, there are still whatever weaknesses there are in the testing regime, and there is not a vaccine. To me, that's just another phase. You could be reopened, but the fact is that everything you're doing every day, you're dealing with this in some way or another. And so during that phase, I think it's going to be a lot of reluctance, even though people want to keep to densify past a certain point. in terms of physical presence. Offices may reopen, but they're going to have to take a lot of precautions, which they are all in the process of planning to do. But when you think about, the question almost is, because you have to think a little bit further out than maybe 2 years, let's say optimistically, that this is a problem and has no medical remedy. What's the longer term? And do people view this as, something I did during the pandemic, or are the changes more lasting? That's the question that one might think about.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a business out there that isn't rethinking everything they do from the ground up. It's just, and that's in some cases that will be a good thing that they may be finding new ways to modernize and update the way their businesses run and the relationship they have with employers, employees. It's just, and the whole what constitutes work. I mean, I think it's going to really come into the equation now, which in turn will probably drive the way compensations are structured and managed. Because if people are going to be not driving to work and commuting every day, and that's kind of a you don't get compensated for that, and I think it's going to give cause to really rethink that whole relationship between an employer and employee, and how what's the basis of the trade between time and money for doing work, and then obviously getting into things like benefits coverage. Because mental health becomes a bigger factor now. People working in isolation, and that ties into expectations about productivity and where you draw the line for supporting people, and you go up and down the line. I mean, it's just going to cause a rethink for everything, and maybe in some ways that could be a healthy thing. I don't know. We don't know, but these are the questions I think we're being forced to consider now, and it's more important than the business itself. Generating sales, and but we can't live on oxygen all day long. I mean, businesses have to produce, and you really wonder how long and how hard they're going to think through these things and actually make changes.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I think it's a very big question, and you have to treat it in segments. Businesses tend to operate in two modes, kind of short-term contingency mode and sort of long-term strategic mode, right? So you could argue, and I'm not sure this is true of all businesses, but I suspect most of them, that what we've had so far is really like a long emergency. And however it lasts in a state where your normal mode of operating is severely constrained, this happens to be this disease, but it could be, it's like a hurricane or a very long natural disaster. You operate sort of in contingency mode, and then normally you get to the point where you're kind of out of contingency mode, and you make some adjustments to be better prepared next time, perhaps, and you make some adjustments in technology based on what you learned operating in the contingency. You invest here, you disinvest there. But I think this is so big compared to anything that it is going to have more lasting changes. And it's not just going to be come out of emergency mode, if you want to call it that. Because one of the things this has shown on many, many levels is it kind of sheds a harsh light on things and tends to accelerate things that are kind of bubbling under the surface anyway. And when it comes to work, it's trends like, robotics, process automation, reconfiguration of the workforce, reskilling, changes in real estate, that were kind of bubbling under the surface for the last 3 years at least. And we were all so busy and so frantic, and the current MO was working pretty well, that there wasn't an emergency pause to rethink. But the question that I think you raised is, what does this reveal about what changes for in the long term, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think for a lot of businesses, it's going to give them more reason to focus on looking at technologies that drive automation, right? Where you don't have to worry about where your people are working from. You don't have to worry about, health or risks that come from being in contact with other people and worrying about when work gets done. If it's automated, there's no, once it goes, it goes. There's no cost. It just goes 24/7. It's efficient, blah, blah, blah. And that's desirable for a lot of it circumvents a lot of the issues that come up with these pandemic situations. And so I think, I worry a little bit about that in terms of, looking to rely less and less on human inputs to mitigate, the impact of these things because it is so disruptive to the organization. I think that's one area to be thinking about, and that's obviously going to be probably a push, I'd say, for more AI-driven technologies and analytics for automating processes, and that kind of thing, and that plays into some of my space of collaboration technologies, where we're seeing this a lot in the customer care space now, where you're deploying a lot more automation to take over a lot of the tasks, and that's been a fundamental issue for a long time, replacing agents with bots, that kind of thing. And we're not there yet, but you know, any company I see in this space, can't run fast enough to explore what to do with these technologies. And I just think this scenario is giving rise to the more need for it. But interestingly, if anything, there's a greater reliance on customer service now because consumers have to have new ways of engaging with the companies that they buy things from. Can't go into stores, that kind of thing, and it creates all kinds of new scenarios where customer service has to kind of be, reinvented to adapt to what's going on now. So there's some real dilemmas I think that these companies are facing with just how much technology, but at the same time, you got to have human touch too.
Yeah, and I think if you look at what a lot of, let's just say, retail businesses are trying right now versus where they were a month ago, where A, they couldn't do anything, and B, it was just like, this is so different. I don't even know what I would do, and so many of them just closed. I think they are going to adapt, but my question is, what portion of the adaptation just disappears after this is all over, and what stays? And so, for example, if I'm a restaurant, just to take one example, if I were a restaurant or if I were a store and I started selling my stuff more online with a table, and then I got a table in front of the door and people come up and they pick up whatever that, but they don't get to browse around as much. Or if I have to gate the number of people coming in to browse based on density and requirements and occupancy, can I last through that? And if so, where do I end up? Because sometimes you see in situations like this where you could almost argue the closest approximation is some kind of wartime, or a really long emergency. Some of the stuff that gets done and people say during the emergency, this is always going to last, is not going to keep the same role. It will have a role. It will not go away, but there'll be backlash against it too. And I think one of those things which we talked about before is going to be video conferencing all day long, right? The amount of remote connectivity that way, and that versus spending a day in the office if you can. I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of rethink about commuting, because commuting really had gotten to the place of being pretty awful for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Maybe they rethink about what metro area they're in or what area of whatever country. But I don't know. That's kind of what I've been trying to think through, and interested in your thoughts too about kind of how much of all of this stuff that we see every day is really response to an emergency and how much of it is long-term change.
Yeah, I'm so with you there, Chris. And like you say, for the environments where remote work is practical or even possible, we're all talking about how, oh, these, this is here to stay. This is how it's just gonna be. And as you say, well, the reality is for a lot of people, working from home isn't that great. And I think that, again, that long term isolation, not everybody is cut out for that kind of thing. And the home environment, for a lot of people is just not conducive to working full time. I know people who, young kids and stuff, and and they're not in daycare, they're not in school. Obviously, it's just impossible. It's just so difficult to make it go. We've latched onto video programs like Zoom and so many others, very quickly, and that's become a big part of that new normal. And it's like anything else. When your grandparents are using it, that's a good sign that the technology is 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 good. It's user friendly and all. But at the same time, I'm kind of with you a bit. I think people will also get so saturated with it, and I think when we have alternatives like meeting in person again, I think there could be a backlash against video meetings, in the sense that it's an immersive mode, and it's kind of like I can only take so much of it throughout the day. It's just it can be very draining, and it's not the norm for long term engagement. It's great for shorter things, I agree, and I think there could be some pushback on that. The people have just said, enough of the video meetings. I just want to be at my desk and work, and if I just want to have a talk to someone, I just do it on the phone or chat. So I just wonder sometimes. Sometimes things go up very quickly and they peak. Have we seen peak video, as they say? And then there can be a backlash too, and it will find its level once people have had enough, and then it goes to where the true utility really lies. So I don't know. I just think we're going to discover these things as we go, but nothing is for sure, right?
Yeah, and I guess if we were to say try to distill what we're saying into a takeaway or two, I would nominate watch this space in the sense that it's easy to celebrate the advances that have been made in collaboration technology, and we have pointed that out in multiple episodes. But you have to think carefully when you're mapping that against all the demographic, social, geographic, economic, and technological changes in and different groups and different places. It's not a be all and end all. And this, that's always true with technology. But my my takeaway is this is a classic example of you can go too far in betting on any direction.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one, Chris. Yep. We don't know how it's going to play out, but the longer you try to force people into something that they didn't sign up for, you know, unless it is a visibly better way of doing things, long term, it will reach a point where it says, this isn't as good as what I was doing before. Some will adapt, and that's the thing too, right? Some will adapt better than others to working from home, not just as workers, but as organizations, right? Some things just aren't going to work that well long term. You can kind of get by short term. So, yeah, it's hard to make any long term bets. And I would just say that, the technologies that we're using today have been a godsend for sure. Like, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if we didn't have these tools with us now, because you just wouldn't be able to do anything. So at least thankfully organizations can keep going, and that's great. But yeah, as a takeaway, I would just say that you know we shouldn't, and we can't really bank on the technology itself as a panacea to kind of cover up all the difficulties we're trying to adapt to. I think it's more a question of we have to have a proper reset on expectations of how well the business can perform, how well employees can be productive and stay motivated and happy in their work. And as you say, if we're in this emergency mode, if it goes on to like a perpetual state, then all bets are off. Then there's just no way to no technology is going to save the day, so to speak. I mean, we just have to find ways to come up with a level that we can all manage from, because revenues are going to be down. Everything is going to be affected, and if it stays that way, um, we just, we're just not going to get to a safe space for a while. So yeah, I'm with you. No long-term bets for sure.
No long-term bets, but I think one could argue that if there is one thing that this boils down to, which is an opportunity, if businesses choose to embrace it, is the opportunity for choice, which is in the long run, choice meaning flexibility, right? So if they are able in the long run, when they get past the contingency phase, to give people more choice about where, when, and how they work, more and not without, I think it's actually going to strengthen the organization in most cases, where people don't have to be slotted into a particular work mode, and when they're more able to mix and match based on where they are in life and who they are and what their work is and the culture of the company and all the physical location. We've developed the technologies to give people the opportunity down the road, and there's going to be winners and losers even if that's embraced. But that to me is the possibility that's dangling out there, which actually would be better in the long run if they do it.
If they do it, yep. Okay, I'm with you on that. And on that note, we're going to have to come to a stop for today.
Okay.
Um, not that we have any place to go. We're just at home. But actually, I do have a call coming up now, and we're going to have to move on to our day. But this is a good landing spot for this episode. So lots to think about as always. So we'll thank our listeners. We're appreciating always your support of what we're doing. So we'll sign off, and we will come back with something I'm sure very different next time around, because nothing stays still very long around here. So Chris, okay, just a good farewell for now.
Well, thanks, John, and we'll reconvene again soon. Thanks everybody for listening. We're always happy that you do, and we will rejoin you next month. Take care.
Okay, and on that note, yes, as we say often enough here, watch this space. Thanks for joining our podcast, and we'll be back with another episode a month from now. Thank you.